Let us look at the Russian Revolution and its role within World War I. This is also the establishment of communism as the ruling party of a nation. First, we will look at some of the major players within the Russian Revolution. Peasants are considered one of the major driving groups of people behind the Russian Revolution. Without the support of the people, a government cannot maintain its power. Peasants and other lower-class working peoples were upset with grueling working conditions, miserably low wages, and child labor. They felt they were unfairly treated with low standards of living and little political power or influence. The intelligentsia, also known as the intellectuals, was the group of people that led and navigated the peasants through the Russian Revolution. The intellectuals were not considered a traditional class in Russia at the time, which included clergy, nobility, merchants, middling urbanites, also known as skilled craftsmen or factory workers, and then peasants. However, they were a highly educated group that disagreed with the political trends of the Tsar and were willing to fight against the ruling party. The clergy was an upper-class part of society and had much political and social influence as the leaders of the established religion within Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church. Their influence before the Russian Revolution will help lead to its persecution by the Communist Party during and after the revolution. The nobility, although considered socially lower than the clergy, represented the conservative Tsar government and their supporters within Russia, which the Russian revolutions were attempting to overthrow. And so, without further ado, let us begin the saga of the revolution. This stage of the saga is set by the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. When Tsar Nicholas II came to power, he was oblivious to Russia's problems. Upon his attainment of the title Tsar, he announced, quote, "The principle of autocracy will be maintained by me as firmly and unswervingly as by my lamented father." End quote. Nicholas II believed in the power of tradition and authority, and through his statement promised to continue the idea of Russification. The Russian Orthodox is the religion of the nation to be followed, the Tsar has absolute power, and Russian is the only language to be spoken. In order to establish this, Nicholas II instituted a program of fear to control opposition. He created a network of spies, censored the press, outlawed all languages but Russian, persecuted ethnic minorities, and executed a wave of pogroms which were organized violence against Jews. As a result, Russia was filled with discontent and instability. Liberals, also known as intellectuals, wanted democracy, a constitution, and rights. Ethnic minorities wanted autonomy, independence. Peasants wanted land reform. Workers wanted better working conditions. And Russia suffered a humiliating loss to Japan in the Russo-Japanese War, which exposed the government's incompetence. The Russian Revolution can point to its beginnings on Bloody Sunday in 1905. On January 22, 1905, unarmed workers peacefully marched toward the Tsar's Winter Palace with a petition for a constitution, the right to form unions, and better working conditions. The Tsar was not home, and the guards got nervous and opened fire, killing 500 to 1,000 of the marchers. Hence the name Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday sparked a series of violent and destructive riots and revolts collectively called the Revolution of 1905. Workers went on strike and refused to work, soldiers mutinied, and peasants burned and looted nobles' homes. Overall, this stopped normal daily life, and the Tsar had to hide in a rural estate. Then the intelligentsia, which were radical, well-educated middle class, organized workers, peasants and soldiers into Soviets, councils. These gained popularity and created a threat to Tsar's power. As a result, short-lived changes came about. Nicholas II conceded to make changes and did two things. He granted freedom of conscience, speech, assembly, and press. In reality, his spy network effectively nullified any of these freedoms. Second, he formed Russia's first legislature, the Duma, which would approve all laws. The Duma was a group of moderates who wanted constitutional monarchy. However, the Tsar retained power via control of military and secret police and dissolved 4 of the Dumas. The breaking point of the Tsar's power came with Russian involvement in World War I. Russia entered World War I for a variety of reasons and enjoyed early success because of a large army, eventually suffering devastating losses due to lack of ammunition, training, and technology. However, since the Tsar spent much time at the front, his wife, Tsarina, ran the country and allowed Rasputin, an illiterate but miraculous monk, also a playboy, to make policy decisions and give positions to friends, thus creating more corruption in the government. Further problems were that the war caused a lack of food and goods for peasants and workers. Soldiers lacked weapons and supplies. Russia was also averaging 30,000 deaths per month in the war. Soldiers were deserting the front, and nobles were going berserk with a lack of leadership within the ranks. The February Revolution, also known as the March Revolution, since the revolution took place in March on a modern calendar, but fell in February in Russia since they followed the older Julian calendar at the time. This February or March Revolution was one of 2 revolutions in 1917 that led to the overthrow of the government. The March Revolution of 1917 began on International Women's Day in 1917, when women took to the street to demand peace and bread. The revolt was joined by soldiers and palace guards. It grew over several days, and eventually the Duma joined in protest, demanding down with the monarchy and bread for all. The Soviet City Workers' Council, in Petrograd, the capital of Russia, gained power as leading force of the revolution, and the Duma knew that the Petrograd Soviet was the seat of power. While at the front, the Tsar was oblivious to troubles back home. When he tried to return home by train, railroads were seized by the Petrograd Soviet. The Tsar became willing to compromise with the constitutional monarchy, but it was too little, too late. Nicholas II thus abdicated the throne from a railroad car, and the Romanov dynasty ended. The Duma then established a temporary government, the Provisional Government, headed by Alexander Kerensky, leader of the Petrograd Soviet. He lost power when he decided to keep Russia in war, despite losses and protests against the war. This will then lead to the rise in Vladimir Lenin's power and influence and the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin was a radical Marxist who led Bolsheviks, radical revolutionaries, to power, but he was exiled to Central Europe for 19 years. He came back to Russia as Germany's secret weapon during World War I to cause chaos and force Russia into surrender. He was opposed to Bolsheviks, who were more moderate and wanted to open membership to anyone. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were also opposed to World War I, and when he returned to Russia, he immediately demanded, quote, peace, land, and bread, end quote, for peasants, workers, and soldiers. He bolstered support for Soviets, but alienated moderate Marxists. In order to defeat the provisional government and establish a Marxist state, Lenin put Trotsky, a former Menshevik, in charge of Bolshevik militia known as the Red Guard. The Red Guard stormed the Winter Palace and arrested Kerensky and other government leaders. The Bolsheviks assumed power, and the revolution was over in hours. Within days, Lenin made 2 major changes. He nationalized all land, redistributing it to the peasants, and factories, control given to workers, although the true power was in the new communist government. Lenin then signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, ending Russia's involvement in war. Russia then entered civil war when Russia, opposed to radical policies of Bolsheviks, formed opposition known as the White Army. To defeat the White Army, Lenin instituted war communism and the Sheka, arresting and killing all enemies of the revolution. 14 to 15 million people died in the ensuing civil war. The civil war constituted of the red communists and the white Tsar loyalists. The communists organized a secret police group called the Sheka that executed Nicholas II, his wife, and 5 children. This is when the story of Anastasia begins. In a quick note, Anastasia did die along with the rest of the family. Lenin further established war communism, which took over the banks, mines, factories, and railroads. The Civil War lasted from 1918 to 1921 and killed approximately 14 to 15 million people. After the Civil War, Lenin established himself as the communist dictator of Soviet Russia. Lenin hoped to transform Russia from a backward feudal society to a modern industrialized nation. He also wanted it Marxist, free of poverty, unemployment, homelessness, illiteracy, and class divisions. He faced huge obstacles in making his dream reality. He lost half the population to World War I and the ensuing Civil War. Wages dropped to 1/10 their previous levels, while inflation rose at 1,000%. There were foreign blockades of goods, and cities became ghost towns. Lenin's answer was to take, quote, 1 step back to go 2 steps forward, end quote. This was through small-scale capitalism in his new economic policy. The Communist Party and USSR instituted equality between men and women, abolished titles and rank, gave the right to vote to all citizens, stripped the church of all its power in order to create a classless society, built schools and medical facilities for all, gave career opportunities for men and women. They also restructured the country politically. They created a union of self-governing republics known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. With this revolution completed, Lenin had established the first communist state.